philosophy can get pretty lame. I like to entertain myself with neat little thoughts like, what is justice? But that doesn't suit everyone all the time. So that's why I'm pleased that good old Tommy P lightened the mood by lighting up his contemporary peer who was out of line. If you didn't know, he was hurting feelings and taking names at the dawn of the French Revolution. Probably fair for a guy shrugging off decapitations for humanity's cause. These revolutionary guys were a little cuckoo. And to be honest, I think that was his ultimate downfall, his insensitivity to ends which he called a part of being rational, which is pretty badass to be fair. For context, when the French Revolution was just coming out the womb, it's like 1790, some dude, Edmund Burke, came in with his rhetorical coat hanger. He originally was writing a letter to some guy about his thoughts on the revolution, but I guess he thought he was really cooking, so 88,000 words just kind of slipped out to ruin my weekend. In this letter book thing, he was not a happy camper. He said revolution hurts people and revolutionaries did not have free license to enact their freedom, however they blah blah blah. We care about Thomas Paine. He saw this whiny shrimp, Mr. Burke, and wrote up a quick response, which at the time apparently translates to a fucking novel, which he did in 4 months, which is kind of impressive. And in it, he wrote a ton of juicy stuff, which we love. Let's see. Thomas Paine wrote that Burke investigates nothing to its source, and therefore he confounds everything. He said that Mr. Burke does not understand what a constitution is. Nice. Then who could forget that Burke endeavored to lead his readers away from constitutional discussion with a wild, unsystematical display of paradoxical rhapsodies. Which I think translates to, he is dumb and a hack spewing doomsday propaganda. This is very exciting stuff. We, of course, are getting into intellectual slander. This isn't just a presidential shit-slinging contest, there is actual content too, which is always nice, and hoped for in 2 battling feature-length novels, namely this constitutional discussion. Edmund Burke didn't like the French Revolution because the French were trying to throw everything out the window. For democracy? Yeah. By Control-Alt-Deleting, they were taking something that has worked for a really long time and maybe needs some minor tweaks now, and exchanged it for a completely untested structure of society that relied on the common folk, no less, which was even worse in his eyes. He gave the example of how the English revolutioned correctly with their glorious revolution. Burke said that shit was super glorious, and his forebears showed restraint. When the English king ran away, they wrote down all the reasons why he sucked and why it was fair to pick someone else. They made a Bill of Rights so that their king wouldn't suck so bad in the future, and did away with all the divine rights and hereditary power stuff. Cool. England essentially went from king is God to king is in agreement to do what's best for the people. They could have, if they had coals between their toes, burned the whole governmental shebang down and made a new democracy based on rationality and blah blah, but Burke agrees with the strategy they actually took. Only change what's necessary, says he. Keep most of what you've got. And for that, Thomas is going to give him that Paine. Tommy's take steers the narrative that England's whole shit is whack. Paine notices that Burke's argument was in the form of France's cringe. Here's the example of England. What he doesn't do is directly compare the two. He doesn't boil them down to their differences. He doesn't analyze why one might be superior when placed side by side. These would be a rational and more scientific approach to criticism. In Paine's words, this is why he avoids it. I readily perceive the reason why Mr. Burke declined going into the comparison between the English and French constitutions, because he could not but perceive, when he sat down to the task, that no such a thing as a constitution existed on his side of the question. His book is definitely bulky enough to have contained all he could say on this subject, and it would have been the best manner in which people could have judged of their separate merits. Why then has he declined the only thing that was worthwhile to write upon? That's rhetorical. He then goes up to bat against England and its now glorious government. At the end of the day, Paine's criticism of England is that it is a government run by superstition and conquerors. It was originally created around divine right, which even Burke agrees is some voodoo magic shit, and should have been left out of government. Why then does Burke advocate for scaffolding built around voodoo magic shit? Also rhetorical. The gloriousness of England's revolution was that it went from a magic government to a conqueror's government. Plot twist, not so much better. Thomas Paine explains why clearly and rationally, with, you guessed it, comparisons. From these preliminaries, I proceed to draw some comparisons. Now, the writing is a little old and takes a couple read-throughs. I would like to do some prep work. Paine wants to say, all the authority in that dumb island is based on some barbarian saying, this stuff's mine, these are the rules now, and then it just works that way for the rest of the time. He specifically points out the Norman king, William the Bastard. When he invaded and needed to buy favor to do what he wanted, he bartered with political power like they were cookies at the lunch table. He said, you need to like me, so here's some free stuff. Just don't vote. 1 million people in Yorkshire get 2 votes, while Old Sarum has 2 people, but also gets 2 votes. Okay, here's a quote. William the Conqueror and his descendants parceled out the country in this manner, and bribed some parts of it by what they call charters to hold the other parts of it the better subjected to their will. This is the reason why so many of those charters abound in Cornwall. The people were averse to the government established at the conquest, and the towns were garrisoned and bribed to enslave the country. All the old charters are the badges of this conquest, and it is from this source that the capriciousness of elections arises. The French Constitution says that the number of representatives for any place shall be in ratio to the number of taxable inhabitants or electors. So Paine and his comparisons here are saying, make it make sense, bro. Stop writing law based on what keeps the people who are in power stay in power. Or, sure, have a bunch of dead guys tell the honest citizens of a nation how to act and behave. Dead guys in the government as it was built yesterday have all the answers. Okay, but if we were to swing back to the middle, Burke's big reason for listening to dead people is that with his government ideals, he was risk averse. Some call him the original conservative. The idea was that any new shit is unproven and might be worse. He might even grant that on paper, a constitution built from the ground up might be more rational or logical or scientific. Okay, but he foretold that these rational beliefs of the rights of man would lead to violent upheaval and end up hurting way more people than was, as is his favorite word, necessary. Thomas took this violence to be a symptom of the disease of despotism, and that this tiny sacrifice would pay off for the freedom of man. So that's kind of the battle. Long history and stability versus the new flashy underdog guy. This rights of man business was kind of like an ends justifies the means deal. A couple people get hurt, but we get utopia theoretically. Burke hated this theory. It wasn't practical and real. Despite universal rights being a nice concept, it couldn't naturally exist. So that's where the debate gets us. Now to show how this debate was settled, how the revolution went, let me show some images to represent what had happened alongside Thomas Paine's prediction of how things would go. When the French Revolution is compared with the revolution of other countries, the astonishment will be that it is marked with so few sacrifices. Among the few who fell, there do not appear to be any that were intentionally singled out. They all of them had their fate in the circumstances of the moment, and were not pursued with that long, cold-blooded, unabated revenge. It is to the honor of the National Assembly in the city of Paris that during such tremendous scenes of arms and confusion beyond the control of all authority, they have been able, by influence of example and exhortation, to restrain so much. Never were more pains taken to instruct and enlighten mankind, and to make them see that their interest consisted in their virtue, and not in their revenge, than have been displayed in the revolutions in France. Whom had the National Assembly brought to the scaffold? None. So does this mean Paine was the loser? Yes. But was he wrong? Not necessarily. From the way I see it, it just means theory can always be fallible in very specific and often unknowable environments. Who could have predicted Robespierre? I mean, it's hard to apply good ideas in a way to make good circumstances. Sometimes the time and place just doesn't work out. Plus, could have been a little nicer about it. I mean, as sick as his 1700 Burns went, I think it's overlooked that a little rhetoric and gloss can go a long way. Burke, for example, was basically saying he'd never let the common man have a say and that inequality was deserved. But it sounded like kinda okay. Now imagine if you had good ideas and good sense in how to explain them. I think many people today have good ideas, but maybe don't possess the good sense with it to not piss all over people in pursuit of those ideas. Because that would be a pain, right? Okay, thanks. Bye.